So it's a great honor to welcome to the stage that so many other Methodist outlaws have graced. Beth Stroud, Greg Dell, Amy DeWong, Bishop Talbert, they've all been right here. So to welcome you, Frank, as an honored member of that particular club. Frank Schaefer.
It is truly an honor for me to be on that list of people, and it is an honor for me to be here today. It's such a joy to see so many supporters. I've been meeting supporters all across this nation, and it's amazing to me to see how much support there is, how large the LGBTQ community is within the United Methodist Church, and how big of a group it is together with the allies. It's mind-blowing to me, and I never knew this. I knew there was some support, but I guess I believed the hierarchy of the United Methodist Church that said, well, there's not that much support. But now I'm seeing it, and there was one point before my trial when I really felt isolated, and I didn't know there were all of you folks out there. And it's such a joy and such a pleasure to meet all of you. And I know today I'm sort of preaching to the choir as I share my story, but I think there's something that I'm sharing today that will reverberate with you and hopefully help you along the way to understand some of the dynamics that are going on behind the scenes. First of all, I want to bring you greetings from my wife who couldn't be here today. We're actually getting our house ready to put on the market, and so somebody has to do the job, and it's going to be my wife because I'm on the road most of the time. And of course, I bring you greetings from my children as well. We are a true LGBT family because half of us are gay and half of us are straight, and that makes for some very interesting dynamics. We actually get along with each other, which is amazing. We love hanging out, and it's been a great family life for us. Barbara Walters once asked me on a show called The View. I'm sure many of you know that show. She asked me, did anybody ever ask you if it's your fault that you have 3 gay children? And I should have said, and I'm not that quick-witted, unfortunately, but what I should have said is, I believe I have 3 gay children because God wanted me to get the message. Now that would have been a great answer. Some interesting dynamics in our family. Our first 3 children are gay, and we were always wondering about our youngest son, Pascal. Is he gay? Is he straight? Could he be gay? So he became the very first person, probably in humankind, who had to come out as straight in our family. Which he did on Facebook, of all places. Come on. As many of you know, I was defrocked on December 19th. And it's been almost half a year. On June 20th, it will be 6 months exactly to the day, and that's the day I'm actually having a hearing, an appeals hearing. And so I want you to put that on your calendar and pray for the United Methodist Church and for all those that are involved in this jurisdictional council. I'm hoping to become a pastor who was defrocked and then will be refrocked. That is my hope and my prayer. So please join me in that prayer. It would be such good news for the LGBT movement within our church. It would be so awesome. Many of you know my story. I don't have to tell my story from the beginning, but one of the points I want to make today is that throughout all that happened, my son Tim coming out as gay, him asking me to perform his wedding to another man, my ministry in the church, having that background and having done the wedding throughout all my time, all my 20 years in the United Methodist Church, I was working under fear. There is something about homophobia when it's in the system, systemic homophobia, which certainly our church, our United Methodist Church, incorporates, as we know, through our Book of Discipline. There's something about that systemic homophobia that will also strike fear into the heart of LGBT people and of allies. And I sensed and felt that fear. And that fear, of course, has to do with the fact that we don't want to rock the boat. That's how I was. I did not want to rock the boat. I did not want to lose my job. One of the nice things in the United Methodist Church, once you become ordained and you're an ordained elder, you have tenure. You have a guaranteed appointment, and that is really nice. That is nice not only for myself, but it's nice for my family to have as well. And so we don't want to lose that. And so even after my son Tim came out and told us this horrible, horrible and sad, sad story of his, where he was really deeply hurt by the discipline, by the doctrine of the United Methodist Church, where he got a message from his own church that he can't be homosexual and go to heaven at the same time. A message that completely devastated him and brought him to the brink of suicide. And after we affirmed our son, Tim, and we told him we love you so much and we'll always love you, no matter what, but we really affirmed him by saying, you know what, obviously you did not choose this for yourself. You were struggling with this. You prayed to God, please make me quote unquote normal. And when that didn't happen, he was willing to take his own life. He said to him, look, this was not your choice. This is proof that this is not a choice. So you have been created by God, gay and all. You are a beautiful young man, and you are gay, and there's nothing wrong with it. Even though we knew we were on the right side, on the side of truth and justice, I felt, being a Methodist minister, that I could not step up and share my theology with my congregation. In fact, I took a year off after Tim came out and I became a chaplain because I thought maybe I can't be a United Methodist minister in a local church. I went back into the ministry after a year, partially because my district superintendent convinced me that was a much better deal for me. After I performed my son's wedding, I had informed, as you know, my bishop and the cabinet. Actually, what I did was, and most of you know this here, clergy folks, we all fill out the profile, right, every year. And there's one section in the profile that said, is there anything else that you need us to know, or that you need to tell us for your next appointment? Well, that was the section in which I wrote this whole paragraph about how I was going to perform my son's wedding on April 28th. It's interesting how even my district superintendent, I found out that he was really in his heart of hearts on the side of gay rights, which I didn't know before. But he also was under this principle of fear. And he told me, Frank, I protected you. I did not commit your form into the computer, so nobody else can find out. Again, fear at work. When I performed my son's wedding, I was fearful of announcing it to my congregation. Even though a part of me really wanted to. You know how, as a parent, you really want to share those joyful moments in your children's lives with everybody, with the whole world? Well, I felt I couldn't. And again, the principle of fear at work, because I felt this would cause a rift, it would rattle the boat, would divide the congregation. And over the years, I was fearful to speak up. And this is really my only regret I have, that I have not stepped up sooner and said those words from the pulpit out loud. And my regret is that maybe there were children in that congregation, my congregation, over the years who were struggling with their identity or sexual orientation and really needed to hear a word from their pastor. And I regret that. One of the people that always pushed me was my wife. My wife, Bridget, she is so awesome. And she was at one point so tired of living in fear and not being able to speak up and speak out and stand with our children and with our LGBTQ community in the church, that she was considering going to another church, even though she was a minister's wife. And she one day said to me, "Honey, there's nothing you can do about this, but I put an equal sticker on my car and it's going to stay there and I'm going to drive it to church, into the parking lot. And there's nothing you can do about it." And she always pushed me, and I'm grateful for that. Because I did make some statements and I had some sermons, and believe it or not, every time I did that and I shared a little bit about my son, Tim, coming out, and when I had a sermon on homosexuality, people would leave the church following that sermon. But wonderful things did happen, even though I had to be very subtle and I operated under the principle of fear. Even then, the grace of God broke through in small parts in my congregation in the most conservative area you could imagine, in Lebanon, Pennsylvania, the Alabama of Pennsylvania. But once the complaint was filed against me, again, I found myself under this principle of fear, because I was supposed to share with my jury at the trial that I did not do this out of rebellion, which I didn't. This is the absolute truth. But I was supposed to emphasize that, you know, all just for the fact that if I came across as rebellious and as an advocate and as somebody who stands by the LGBT community over and against the book of discipline, then I might lose my job, my credentials. And so on day one of my trial, I did argue that this was an act of love, and it was the truth. And I told them, I used the parable of the Good Samaritan, and some of you were, how many folks were at the trial actually? A number of you were there, yes. Oh wow, thank you. And I tried to argue with the parable of the Good Samaritan. I said, look, I had to help my son. He was the beaten up man in the street. He was robbed, and I could not pass by on the other side of the road like the Levite and the priest. Now they were on their way to Jerusalem. They had a service to do. They could not become ritually unclean. They could not get blood on them and still conduct the services. But isn't what Jesus teaches us that we are supposed to help our neighbor in the street who is beaten up and needs our help? I could not turn my back, and I could not say no to my son when he requested for me to perform his wedding. It was an act of love. Had I said no to him, I would have negated all of my affirmations of him, and I would have done more damage than what the doctrine of the United Methodist Church had done to him. I could not do that, even though I may have become ritually unclean and broken a rule in the discipline. But I could not. And isn't that what Jesus teaches us? Well, the counsel for the church, the prosecutor, did not agree with that analysis. In fact, he actually said, literally, he said, in church history, love has never trumped the law. He did, and then he continued to quote from the book of Jude, and talked about the immorality of the last days, and he talked about Judgment Day, and said to the jury something like, if you do not find Reverend Schaefer guilty, you will have to answer for that on Judgment Day. And he talked about homosexuality as being the immorality that Jude is referring to. And it was such a hateful speech that I heard a noise behind me, and I remember how Sarah and how some of you guys who are here today were standing in protest of what you were hearing, a very hateful speech. And Christopher Fisher, the prosecutor, also noticed it. He turned around and he asked the judge to make those people stop. And in a moment of grace, Bishop Gwynn said, "Well, you're almost at the end. Just continue." But I have to tell you, I felt good that night when I sat at the dinner table with my attorneys. I asked them, you know, how big would it be if I got acquitted? Because I felt good that I got some form of defense in, and I thought it went pretty well. And I thought, well, what would it mean for the United Methodist Church if the jury actually sided with the counsel for the church after hearing that awful closing statement? My counsels were less optimistic than I was, and they predicted that I would be found guilty, and so I was. But there was another day. On day 2, it was all about finding a penalty, an appropriate penalty. And finally, I was allowed some witnesses, and my son, Tim, was the star witness that day. I was so proud of my son because he told his story of how he was harmed by the doctrine of the church. And he told his story in such a way, it was so graceful and still loving and not accusing any person. I was so very proud of him. I was in tears when he testified. But one of the things I noticed was that once again, the church was not listening, was not really listening to his story of how this doctrine had harmed him so much that he lived in a very lonely and dark place, in a desperate place where he got pushed to the brink of suicide. The church, once again, was not listening to him. And I remembered all of the letters and the emails and the Facebook messages I got from so many of our LGBTQ members within the church, within the United Methodist Church, and a few outside of the church, that I had received leading up to the trial, because all of this had somehow hit the press. And so many contacted me and shared their story with me. Stories that were just as sad and devastating as the story of my son. And here was caught in this dilemma, because on the one hand I feared losing my job, and so my counsels and I had come up with this very carefully crafted statement that was so political and so diplomatic. And they coached me and said, you know, if they ask you, will you ever perform a gay wedding again, you know, answer something like, well, I can't answer that question. Nobody can predict the actions of their future. It all depends, you know, something like that. Evade that question. But as we broke for lunchtime, I knew in my heart that I could not do that. I could not read that statement, and I could not answer the questions that way, because what was in my heart was that pain that I felt, not just from my son and my children, but from the LGBT community in our church and beyond. And all of those members that have asked for years, and where is my pastor? Why is my pastor not standing with me? I prayed a desperate prayer during that lunch break. I actually went into my room in the cabin and I sat on my bunk bed and I said to God, God, I think I know what I have to do, but is this really something I can do? Can I stand up to the United Methodist Church and just tell them what's really on my heart? Is this something that you want me to do? And I said to God, honestly, you know, I am afraid. I don't know what to do. If they take my credentials, what am I going to do tomorrow? Where's my paycheck going to come from? What about my health insurance? What about my 2 boys that are in school and still need my financial support? What am I going to do? And I remember thinking about Jesus, but thinking about Jesus' act of love on the cross in a new and deeper way. I was thinking, wow, what Jesus did was like a real class act. I mean, he didn't just give up his career and his security. Yeah, no, seriously, think about it. As he hung on that cross, he still showed love to those who put him there. Those Roman soldiers were at the foot of the cross, who had just nailed him to the cross. And he prayed for them. Father, forgive them, for they do not know what they do. And all of a sudden, losing my career didn't seem as big of a deal. And I knew what I had to do. But I was still very, very nervous because I had no speech prepared. And I remember sitting in this gymnasium right before I was called up, and I took a pen and a piece of paper and I scribbled down sentences and words and tried to structure a speech. And I was called up, and I even left that piece of paper there because I couldn't read my handwriting. That's how nervous I was. In fact, I was sick to my stomach. And you know, when you're sick to your stomach, you kind of feel weak. And so I sat in the witness stand, and something incredible happened. I looked over to where my family was seated in the room, and I could see them look at me with so much love and support in their eyes. And I remembered how my children had said to me during this whole preparation for the trial, Dad, I'm so proud of you. And how my wife, for the first time in her life, said, honey, I'm so proud of you. And then I looked beyond them, and I saw all of our supporters, like Sarah and so many of you that were there, and I recognized them because they were wearing rainbow-colored stoles. There were so many of them. They didn't just sit on my side of the room, but they sat on the prosecution side of the room as well. So many of them, and I looked at them, and it was like I could feel their support, and I could sense their prayers, and strength came back into me, and I started to address this jury, and I was just totally flabbergasted at the way those words came out. And the speech was just so, it was just right on. The words were right there. And I want to actually read something to you from Mark 13. This has become my experience. I want to give credit where credit is due. Mark 13:11 says, whenever you are arrested and brought to trial, even if it is a church trial, do not worry beforehand about what to say. Just say whatever is given you at the time, for it is not you speaking, but the Holy Spirit. So, the very first thing I did after I got the official transcript, the court transcript, I looked up that speech because I was like, do I remember this right? Does it just really come out this great? And sure enough, it did. And so I actually brought to you the official transcript today, and I'm going to read to you about a third of the speech that I gave. So I was looking at the jurors who were all seated over there, all United Methodist pastors, and I said to them, so before you make a decision today, please know that I will continue to minister to all people equally, regardless of their gender, nationality, race, social status, economic status, or sexual orientation. And my message is going to be that we as a church and as individuals need to stop judging people based on their sexual orientation or anything else. We have to stop the hate speech. We have to stop treating them as second-class Christians. We have to stop harming beloved children of God. We have to reach out to them and treat them as Jesus would have treated them. And then actually I did something that I would have never done the day before. I took out a rainbow-colored stole that had been given to me. And I said to the trial court, you know, this rainbow-colored stole was given to me yesterday by my attorney, Bill Ewing. It was actually his wife's idea. His wife said, give this to Frank. And it actually has her name in it right here. Ann Ewing. It's hers. So I put this stole on after I asked permission from the bishop, and he granted it to me, and I said, I'm putting this stole on. And while I do, I vow never to be silent again. after I got dismissed from the stand and I sat down, it was like I had never felt as much of a peace in my heart in that moment. It was like a Zen moment. I felt at peace with God and the world and myself and everybody else. You know, that was the first time when I had no more fear in my heart. It's like it says in 1 John 4:18, perfect love drives out all fear. I did not care at that moment, I swear to you, I did not care whether they were going to take my credentials or whether they were going to pick up stones and start stoning me to death. I did not care about that. I had no more fear. And as you know, the story continued in such a great way. All of my fears that I ever had about losing my job and losing my security, all of that, God took care of it. Provided for me and my family in such a beautiful way. It's people like you all across the nations, the reconciling part of the church, that is supporting us with honorariums that amount to about the same salary I had as a pastor. And I was so worried about losing my health insurance. And you know, we are on Obamacare now, which is not... And this is the truth. It's not only affordable, but we actually have a better plan now than we had on the Eastern Pennsylvania Conference. And as Ben said initially, what people meant for harm, God has taken and turned it into a moment and ministry of healing, not only for us as a family, because our faith is restored in the true church of Jesus Christ, but also as I share our story and my story, my message, people's lives are touched as well. Thank you so much for taking the time to listen to me today and for all your support. Thank you so much. Amen.